Scram is a video game. Let's talk about it. Scram is a first-person zombie survival shooter. In it, there are two teams, the mutants and the peasants. The peasants are what you would call the survivors, or the humans. They are the ones with the guns, and they have to hold off the mutants from killing them, and if they die, they will become a mutant themselves. This in itself isn't really a unique concept, but what makes games good is their ability to take something standard and improve upon them. There are an innumerable amount of games that are bog standard and forgettable tower defense games, and yet games like Plants vs. Zombies has gotten 2 sequels and 2 third-person shooter spin-offs. My point being that if a game approaches its genre with an innovative and creative outlook, rather than just cashing in on the genre, it will more likely than not be a game of quality. If I ask you to name a battle royale game right now, I'm pretty sure you can list dozens of them. H1Z1, PUBG, Fortnite, Realm Royale, Rapture Rejects. These are all just examples of battle royale games, and you know damn well that people nowadays only play one of these, and the rest have been left behind to rot in a bear's cave. So, if we've established that a good game can take an unoriginal concept and make it fun by adding its own spin, how does Scram make the oversaturated zombie shooter genre unique? I'd be willing to attribute Scram's divergence from typical zombie games with 3 of its traits: its appearance, its humor, and its mutant types. So, let's break down each of these and see if they can make Scram interesting. Let me ask you a question. Picture any zombie shooter game right now. Now, picture another one. Now picture one more. If you only know one, that's fine. What do they all have in common? If you were able to picture at least 3, you should have noted that they all try to go for a hyper-realistic look. They all have the same post-apocalyptic atmosphere. They all use the same gray and brown colors to signify decay. They all have fire and destruction and are all usually very dark and grim. All of the zombies are rotting corpses, straight out of their coffins, with worn out clothes and flies over their balding head. They all stagger and limp and drool and chase you relentlessly. This isn't necessarily a bad thing because aiming for realism in games can lead to an immersive experience. So how does Scram's art style compare to this hyper-realistic zombie trope? Quite simply, Scram looks like it was drawn by a first grader. The graphics are vibrant and some of them are simply awful. So is this to Scram's advantage or does it hurt the game? I'd say this is both. On the plus side, most people would be blown aback if they saw this cartoony, bright and colorful zombie game because it wouldn't fit with the common tropes. However, I know many people would simply refuse to play Scram because of its art style. There are many who hate games like Undertale, Minecraft, Pac-Man, and games that look like that because they have bad or outdated graphics. I simply sigh in dismay at these people because they are simply neglecting themselves of a potentially riveting gaming experience just because they don't like how it looks. I wish it wasn't like that, but this is the world we live in. I'd be willing to put money on Scram never going big because of its poor art aesthetic. This is where we reach a fork in the road. You, the viewer, either like Scram because it tries to make its art style unique from the crowd, or reject it for its intentionally crappy aesthetic. I personally feel that you should try the game regardless, and if you enjoy the gameplay of it, then good for you. The big takeaway from this is just like everyone says, never judge a book by its cover, or rephrase better, would be, never deny a game for its graphics. This is one aspect that I feel can either progress, regress or egress your appreciation for a game. Some people love the humor of some games, while others vow to never play them because they were offended by its humor. On this point, I can't really tell you to do something that will hurt you or your feelings in one way. And with this, we reach Scram's biggest crutch. This game has an incredibly anti-politically correct humor style. If you are the type of person that can put politics aside for your enjoyment of something, that's great, because that means you're opening yourself to more opportunities. However, if you are the type of person that sees something that goes in contrary to your political belief, and you openly reject it, well then forget about this game. This game has a very anti-politically correct humor style, but some of that was changed because I guess people were just too upset by it. Originally, the soldiers were called Nazis, and their special was to seek hail.
We did it!
We ate them all!
To become impervious to damage. You could actually hear Hitler in-game yelling, people rallying with him. Additionally, the Christians were actually called Catholics, which were actual KKK members, and the people with bombs strapped to their chests were called jihadis. They can still blow themselves up, just as can the soldiers become invincible and the Christians can become invisible, but it pains me to see these jokes removed from the game because... Actually, why was it removed? I did some digging, and the developer of the game only said one word in response. I'm pretty sure it's easy to assume what he meant. Despite the changing of those names, some of the humor is still there. For example, the pizza box in the main menu says Pizza Butt instead of Pizza Hut. Since most zombie games have either no humor at all or very sanitized humor, it is refreshing to see a game like Scram come completely out of nowhere with its supreme edginess. Whether or not that bothers you enough to never play the game is up for you to decide. I'd recommend, like with the art style, that you try it out regardless, and if you have fun, that's a new game for you to enjoy. Most zombie games follow a similar format. The zombies are all bots, and the humans are all controlled by the players. The zombies by themselves are extremely weak, but have power in numbers. This is pretty easy to understand, as balancing people with guns and dead people without them is a challenge. This is what separates Scram from the typical zombie crowd, or at least what separates it for me. Each peasant in Scram is exactly the same. They have the same health, movement speed, and all receive money at the end of each round to buy guns for the next one. However, the stats of your mutant depends on which mutant you initially selected. That, to me at least, really adds a layer of depth. Having class-based zombies means that there is more versatility to team composition. The problem with Scram's mutants is that if you buy a soldier, for example, you revert back to a regular mutant upon death. What's more is that when you die, you also have a random chance to become any mutant type. If I can become a soldier without spending any money, then why put it up for sale in the first place? At least with the zombie types, they're all extremely cheap, which lets anyone afford them even if they got 0 kills. This system of giving anyone any mutant type for free upon death ruins the purpose of putting them up for sale. What would make more sense is if you bought a mutant type and stuck with it for the duration of the round. That would make players put more thought behind what they buy when they buy it. Another possible addition would be a sort of mutation station, where given enough money, mutants would be able to change their type mid-game. Most rounds last around 5 minutes, so giving players the option to choose what type they want to play as and improve upon would better the experience overall. If you want to punish the mutants, I'd recommend the mutation station system, but upon death, you always respawn as a default mutant. I don't know why you'd do this besides making the experience worse for your players, so letting players choose what they play as is ultimately the better way to go. Maybe you can even center the map design around it, like put 2 ammo boxes around the mutation station so that more experienced peasants can prevent mutants from changing their type mid-game. I'm just throwing around some potential ideas, but I would really like to see more customizability and consistency throughout a round rather than the chaotic mess the current system provides. With this in mind, we can conclude that Scram is definitively a different zombie game than most others out there. But if that's the case, how does its core gameplay add up? Please keep in mind moving forward that this game is supposed to be as silly and quirky as games get. Just based on the art style and humor alone, that should be apparent. However, any game that wants to entertain its players should strive to make them feel good, or so I believe. Sure, no game should appeal to everybody, because that might ruin a core mechanic that it harbors. Take Cuphead, for example. Cuphead received media backlash for being too hard. Well, guess what? Cuphead wants to and should be itself. And if you can't pass it, get good or go home. If people don't want to sink in the effort to beat each boss, then they don't deserve a skip button. With that logic, you might as well skip straight to the end of the game without a challenge. One of the best aspects of the game Cuphead is that it is challenging, and trying to strip that away won't make it Cuphead. Just like Cuphead, Scram can and should be exactly as it wants to be. However, this game really might shut off many people's enjoyments for it because it can't be taken seriously. The problem with making Cuphead easier is that you are removing from the experience. In this case, you don't remove from Scram if you make the game more competitive, or, at the very least, more balanced, since it lets everyone benefit from a fairer game. Games like Cat Mario are artificially hard because they want to be, but also because they are single-player games. That means that you can quit the game and come back to it with the only one suffering being you. Scram, however, is not a single-player experience, so that means that it should be balanced enough for any of the two teams to win. What ends up happening every round is that the peasants win again, and again, and again, and enough people get bored of winning that they start to idle, letting the mutants win. Of course, this is hyperbole, but if you are on the mutant side, you're pretty much going to lose. This is a clear-cut problem in balance. However, this game doesn't really have the potential to be competitive, assuming that all competitive games strive for balance, since the skill ceiling for peasants is phenomenally higher than the skill ceiling for mutants. What can the world's best mutant player do if all they have is melee, and the opposing player has a sniper rifle? And yes, I know that certain mutant types can wield guns, but they can't pick up guns that the peasants drop, which gives the peasants a huge advantage over mutants. Another example of a higher skill ceiling for peasants over mutants is the Spaz 12 shotgun. Not only is this capable of one-shotting mutants at close range, it has a built-in knockback feature. Every gun in Scram has this built-in knockback, but none of them compared to the knockback of the Spaz 12. I'm fairly certain this knockback feature is supposed to be some silly way to demonstrate the power of the Spaz 12, but in reality, it is its greatest strength. Much like rocket jumping, if you aim it at your feet, jump, then shoot, you can get tremendous air for minimal effort. To the same degree, if you aim it backwards, jump, then shoot in midair, you can basically use it to greatly increase your movement speed. This makes you pretty much impossible to kill if used correctly, since you can launch yourself at enemies and insta-kill them with the Spaz's crazy point-blank damage. This is just one example of how peasants can use their larger arsenal to attain an advantage, that of which mutants can't dream of. The special mutants have ultimates, but they are extremely situational and mostly underpowered. The soldier can become invincible, but cannot move whilst doing it. Since his gun is as accurate as my aim when I'm on Adderall, any nearby peasant can simply back up and taunt him while he helplessly stands there missing every shot. Another peasant can walk up behind him and, with any automatic gun or shotgun, mow him down like those weeds your uncle keeps chopping up every time he visits your house. My point with all of this is that the game cannot be competitive or balanced ever without the mutants receiving a buff so big that the amazing bulk would run from them. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but because this is true, Being a peasant feels like you're hiking up a mountain, whilst being a mutant feels like you're walking on a treadmill and hoping to go somewhere. There is just too big of a rift between the potential strength of the peasants and the mutants for this game to be balanced, which will leave your chances of winning up to a complete dice roll as to what team you're on. Of course, there is some individual skill involved, such as dodging and aiming, but it mostly comes down to the game to pick whether or not you'll have a good round. In summary, the game isn't balanced, and if it wants to maintain itself as a goofy game, it can't ever be balanced. This can and will lead to one team, mainly the mutant, having a worse gaming experience than the peasants, which can lead to less people overall who will take interest in your game. Would you want to play a game where 50% of the matches you play, theoretically, since there are two teams, you'd imagine there's an even chance you get put into either team, aren't fun and the other 50% are? Not to mention that the respawn times for the mutants is absolutely horrible. Since there is no respawn timer, you'll die and sit there for what feels like 10 seconds waiting to respawn and die again. Like, why even bother if that is a system that's in place? With that concern out of the way, let's discuss the gameplay, something I've mostly neglected throughout this video to address some strengths and weaknesses the game has running with it. The other topics I've mentioned so far are a lot more interesting than the gameplay. Honestly, other than the fact that you can play as different zombie types, this game is pretty bog standard. The gunplay is serviceable at best, with varying degrees of things like recoil, knockback, and bullet spread all affecting your ability to aim whilst in a battle. With some guns, like the sniper rifle, bullet spread isn't really an issue, but that's besides the point. The default mutant gameplay is very boring, with only a melee attack to boot. The special mutant gameplay is more interesting and varied, but certain mutants' gameplay, like the soldiers, can get stale fast. Mutants like the terrorists have this happy ground of stale and interesting, with the suicide bomb ultimate being either intensely satisfying to get a quad kill with, or intensely dissatisfying to just do it next to somebody and do 0 damage. The Christian can turn invisible, or partially anyway, as his outline is still slightly visible, akin to a spy from TF2 being bumped. If the enemy is oblivious enough, the Christian can attack them without being seen. However, since the outline of the Christian is technically visible, it makes the ultimate borderline useless, as they can easily be spotted and murdered. As well as that, they have lower health than a normal mutant, making them pretty much useless. However, this is primarily a balance issue rather than a gameplay one, and I've already harped on the balance of this game enough. In terms of gameplay, this game gets a B from me. It isn't awful, but it isn't great, which is mostly due to its horrific balancing. The takeaway from this is that the gameplay isn't anything to write home about, which really detracts from this otherwise unique game. Now for some finishing thoughts. Overall, this game has a lot of potential with its unique mutant mechanic, but it fails to deliver on this because of its unbalanced implementation. Other than that, Scram is a crappy looking, anti-PC human vs. zombie game that succeeds in few avenues with unfair gameplay. Trust me, you won't be missing anything if you don't try this. However, like I advocated earlier in the video, I implore you to try this game out anyway. From what I was able to find, this game only has one developer, and considering the recent Matt Pat controversy, I want to give this indie developer as much traffic as I can. Indie devs really have a tall mountain to climb to get noticed, so any and all attention I can send to this game, even if some of it is negative, will help the developer grow. It's just like they say, any publicity is good publicity. And while I don't wholeheartedly agree with this statement, I do feel that this one guy should receive more attention and scrutiny. Attention so that he has an incentive to continue working on this free game, and scrutiny, like in this video, so that he can improve upon his craft. If you want a concrete number or letter, I'd give Scram a B-. As I have said before, it isn't an awful game, and there is definitely enjoyment to be had through this game, but it definitely isn't a masterpiece, and is akin to something you play once with your friends every 3 months or so. It isn't really too memorable, although one of its mechanics is. Just like the skin of the mutants in the game, its skin is rotten and weak, and probably won't ever transcend for generations to remember. Thanks for watching this video. It goes without saying that it took a long time to make, so if you enjoyed it, leave a like and comment down below why you liked it. If you hated it, dislike it and let me know why you hated it. Any and all feedback is appreciated. With that being said, thanks for watching and thanks for giving me your time.